It's no secret that writing can be lonely work, but does it really have to be? Whether you're full-time, part-time, or just starting out, you'll get insights into the tricks, tips, and production habits of writers from every level of the biz. From best-selling authors to those launching their first novels, you're sure to be in the company of friends as we encourage great writers to divulge and share their secrets. This is the Great Writers Share podcast with your host, best-selling author, Daniel Wilcox.
Hello and welcome to the Great Writers Share podcast with me, Daniel Wilcox, where every week I hijack an hour or so of time from some of the kindest and hardest working writers around today to join me on the show and discuss everything that makes them tick, roar and bounce. Today's date is the 25th of February and I'll go straight into my personal update because I've got a lot of stuff to talk about. It's been a very, very enlightening week. So this week has been for me all about mindset realignment. I've spoken to a few people within the indie writing community and got opinions on certain upcoming projects I'm going to be looking at. Had some very, very, very helpful people who I won't shout out their names, but if you listen to this, thank you guys, you know who you are. And I've got a very, very exciting few months lined up in which I'm going to basically be working on a massive fiction experiment, modelling a release strategy after someone who's been on this show formerly. And once I've got that in place and started getting the wheels in motion, I'll definitely be reporting back and let you know, guys, know how it goes. I think, without teasing it too much, I think it's going to be quite exciting, but I will say no more, or I'll say that I'm very, very optimistic about what the outcome could be, but I'll say no more for now and just leave it there. But mostly, yeah, I've read a few different books this week. I've been reading Paul Tremblay's Growing Things, which is a book of short stories, which has a few gems in there and a few not so gems, to be honest. But that's just my personal opinion. Read Becca Syme's Dear Writer, You Need to Quit, which I'm 100% getting Becca on the show at some point because I need to talk to her. She's incredible. And she was recently on the Rebel Author podcast. So if you want to check out a little bit about her and find out why she's so incredible, then definitely head on over and check that. But not before you finish listening to this one. And I've literally just got off a 2-hour, hour and a half Skype call with a bunch of fantastic guys as we look at dabbling in the realm of a D&D podcast, which I'm very excited about because if the rest of the campaign is anything like the first episode we just recorded, then there's going to be a lot of goodies coming up. And it's just a lot of fun. I think for me, someone who has or is involved in 2 different podcasts, weekly releases, and there's always that pressure of making sure that they're out on a certain day, to have a podcast that's just a bit of fun is definitely something that I'm looking forward to and something that I'm definitely having fun playing with. But enough about me. Today's guest is Mr. John L. Monk, who is a fiction writer of post-apocalyptic, of sci-fi, and most recently LitRPG fiction. And John Monk is someone that I was definitely excited to have on the show. I was going to say back on the show, but to speak to again. He came on the show for the Story Studio. If you guys want to listen to his episode, which was, I want to say February 2017. Man, it's crazy how time flies. Then just head out to the Story Studio and check out episode 26, which is John L. Monk's previous interview. But John's a really interesting guy. He's someone who came to my attention when I first heard him on the SPP, the Self-Publishing Podcast show with Johnny, Sean and Dave, again about 3.5 years ago. Lightning in the Bottle success with one of his post-apocalyptic books. His sci-fi series was doing fantastic. He's played around a little bit with the ideal optimum times between release dates, and he's kind of been looking at how best to release books to match his writing style, because he's not one of the traditional fast writers that you're seeing a lot of this time. He's definitely someone that likes to take his time, who likes to put himself into a book, and he's someone who I definitely consider as a fantastic writer. I've read a few of his books, and each one of them has impressed me, so I was definitely glad to have him on the show. Some of the main things that we talk about finding the ideal release schedules. So, like I mentioned, he had a book 2 books come out in 2017. He's recently released 3 books, one after the other, in the rapid release schedule at the end of last year, in his Ethan's of Chronicles series, which are doing pretty well. He talks about writing through the tough stuff as someone who's written in the post-apocalyptic genre. He talks a lot about how you get through those periods where even your own content of what you're writing starts to drag you down and starts to feel a bit heavy, and how you continue finding the inspiration and just ploughing on through and seeing the brighter side of that, because let's be honest, writing certain genres can be quite difficult depending on which arena you're playing. And I know that, speaking as someone who writes a fair bit of horror, there are certain scenes, there are certain days in which you'll be writing a lot of the dark stuff, and it can sort of weigh you down emotionally, and you find those ways to bring yourself back up. And a lot about staying true to yourself as well. So there's a lot to take away from this interview. John Monk's a very honest guy, he's a very open guy, and he's someone who I think has gleaned enough wisdom that you should definitely be listening to what he has to say. But a quick shout out to the patrons over at patreon.com/greatwritersshare. Thank you guys for supporting the show every week, making sure the lights are turned on, making sure the show continues to run. No new patrons this week, but I will be announcing the monthly giveaway for March, which is something that I haven't done since the hiatus I took over Christmas. So from March, there will be a giveaway running. It will run across the Patreon page and the Facebook page. Patrons will get additional entries into the giveaway, so we'll get an increased chance of winning whichever book is going to be put forward. Obviously, if anyone has any suggestions, then please do put them forward. Get yourself either into the Facebook page or the Patreon page and find out more about that. I am also on the cusp of putting out my first wad of merchandise, which it's not even really for you guys, to be honest. It's for myself. I just want to wear my own product. So I put together a line of thermoses. I've got mugs, I've got notebooks, I've got t-shirts, I've got the whole wad of stuff. So within the next few weeks, I'll have some stuff in which, if you want to go around and rep the Great Writers Share brand, I'm going to put some quirky phrases and stuff on there as well. Just check it out. I'll be putting notes about that in all the relevant groups, so keep an eye out there. Speaking of the Facebook group, if anyone does want to go over and just check out what's bubbling in the cauldron over at facebook.com/groups/greatwritersshare. I've pulled from our list of new welcomees one of my top tips of this week, which is from the one and only Angela Ackerman, who says, "My biggest piece of advice is not to be in a hurry. Strong fiction takes time, and we need to be open to learning and invest the energy needed to make sure our very best work ends up on the page. So don't be afraid to seek out mentors, get critique partners, experiment and challenge yourself to identify areas where you can grow. Better fiction means happy readers who become your superfans." And I think no truer words have been spoken. But without any further ado, let's dive into the reason that you're here, which is the interview with the one and only Mr. John L. Monk. John L. Monk is the creative mind behind such series as the Jenkins Cycle, the This Dark Ages series, and the Chronicles of Ethan. His work has spanned the genres of science fiction, post-apocalyptic, with his most recent venture taking him into the genre of LitRPG. John lives in Virginia, USA, with his wife Dorothy. A writer with a degree in cultural anthropology, he boldly does the dishes, roots out evil wherever it lurks, and writes his own stunts. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thanks.
No worries. It's good to have you back. We were obviously talking a little bit before this. We spoke, it was literally 3 years ago. I was looking it up earlier on the Story Studio feed. It was 3 years since we've last spoken. And I won't ask you to go into everything that's gone on since then, but how are things generally?
Let me see. I hate my job still. I'm not full-time, not like you. I'd like to know what full-time, like how much money I have to make to go full-time. If you ask my wife, it's about what I make now.
Yeah.
If you ask me, I think we could be eating ramen noodles and, just going cheap,
No, it's definitely the dream, and obviously you're taking steps to get there. You've got some good stuff coming out. I think last time we spoke was not long after you'd released Hell's Children, and you were on the cusp of writing Hell's Encore, which obviously that launched in June 2017, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was actually I really liked it. It was a great follow-up, but I made a mistake as an indie author, and I wrote it a year after the first one took off. People like the first one. It's very close to 300 reviews right now. They're generally pretty good reviews. And if I had just followed up quickly, then I would have been in such better shape. I might actually be making enough money now to quit, according to my wife. Well,
that was one of the things that I wanted to come on to, because in this show, I tend to dig quite deeply into mindset, how people think, people's process, and everything else. Was there a particular reason that there was sort of that year gap in the release between the two?
Yeah. When you write a story about, it's kind of like, it's sort of like a Lord of the Flies story where you have all these children and there's a lot of brutality. So when you're writing a story about kids I hate to say this, it just feels weird to say, but kids killing kids in a sort of world where there's no adults present to do, anything about it, it can kind of wear on you. It's it's like you're walking on a tightrope. You go to the right, then you're a barbarian author who likes the stories about children killing children. And if you go on to the left, you're not realistic. You're telling a story, a puff piece that's like a Disney story. And I had to walk right in the middle of reality and brutality, and so that was a difficult tightrope walk. And it's also you're constantly thinking, okay, how's this child going to kill that child today? And you're also trying to get your head into the minds of children, and you're not a child yourself. So these are all very difficult things. So it's going to take a while to write a book like that. Yeah, there's emotional stress, there's intellectual stress, and I still work. So that's the other thing. And I also hold myself kind of to a high standard when it comes to the writing. That's not a slight against other authors. It's really just maybe I have, like I have to be a little too perfect when I write. And when you're being perfect, when you're putting out a rough draft, it's going to slow you down, and I'm not perfect when I write my rough draft as much as I try to be. I'm not perfect after it's published either. But I try my best.
No, that is something that I'm sure people who listen to the show regularly know, that it's a fascination of mine at the minute, which is the whole argument between sort of speed, quality, quantity, all that kind of thing, because it's definitely very much undecided in the indie game as to which is the right way to go. And obviously everyone has their own methods. When it came to writing those scenes, like you say, that have sort of kids killing kids and all this sort of that brutality, which as someone who has read Hell's Children, is delivered quite well. And I personally don't think there's too much of like thinking of the barbarian side. But how did you actually manage those moments where you were really in sort of a deep scene where it gets quite brutal? How did you sort of, I guess, balance that against getting the words down, but not trying to sort of grind yourself down mentally?
Well, actually, when you're writing a brutal scene, like that, the words come kind of fast. But what ends up happening is, you sort of, you go back and forth on whether or not you're going to keep that scene in. Have you read Hell's Encore? It's okay if you haven't.
I haven't yet, no.
Yeah, there's a scene in Hell's Encore that is so brutal and so soul numbing, and all the bad things, that it's the scene that I almost dared. It's like I was cheekily daring the reader to keep reading or throw the book across the room. It's not like the main character died or anything like that. Nothing like I'm going to kill all my main characters like George R.R. Martin because he made a lot of money. No, I'm just saying it's just some rough stuff. And I went back and forth for a long time as I was writing that, trying to figure out whether or not I was going to keep it in. And if I wasn't going to keep it in, I had to replace it with something that would probably feel kind of like a bandage or a Band-Aid or a patch or something like that in a story. And it would also just deflate from the quality of the story. The ending of Hell's Children, as you remember, was sort of brutal. It was brutal. It was really brutal. I don't know. It's just like I said, the words come fast, but then there's this period where you're kind of like rewriting it, and you water it down, and then you build it back up, and then you water it down, and you build it back up. Ultimately, I think I always fall on the right side, which is write it true to kind of what your intent was, write the reality, and never mind the bad reviews.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think particularly in post-apocalyptic, you need that element of reality. I know that in one of the books that me and Luke did, the Rot, there was a scene in that which we get a lot of. If there's any criticism at all, it's for this particular scene. But at the time, it was very much like it just felt right to be in there. It was very much a part of. Spoiler alert for people who were thinking of reading it: the dog dies in a very horrific way. But it was very much one of those moments where it was like, okay, this needs to happen in order for it to feel realistic and for it to roll on. And that seems to be a genre in which that's, I guess, given a little bit more leniency towards, as opposed to potentially some other genres.
Wow, you killed a dog in your book.
I mean, we literally popped its skull between a man's fists. So,
Dude, that's like the number one thing. It might as well be a book called Don't Kill the Dog in your book.
well, the good thing we did is we replaced it in the second book.
Oh, yeah. It's got a brand new dog. As
We
if that
very.
makes it okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's very brave of you. I would. Yeah, here's the thing: as much as I'm talking about brutality and children killing children, I still haven't killed a dog yet. I don't think it's ever going to happen.
It's just going to bounce back on myself now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and then obviously, so Hell's Encore came out in June 2017, and you've spoken briefly a little bit about sort of gaps between releases. And if my research is right, there wasn't another release until October 2019, which is the start of your Chronicles of Ethan series, in which you then released 3 books within 3 months. So can you give us a little bit of a background on how that all came about to be?
Sure. I was just so burned. I was so burned about the lack of sales, or the sales were, you know, they weren't there for Hell's Encore, and it was because the readers had just forgotten about me. And I said it's just not going to happen again. So I wrote 3 in a row, and I didn't want the readers to forget me. And they're short books. They're about 55,000 to 65,000 words each. And I wanted them to be pretty quick reads where you go boom, boom, boom through the series. So I think I succeeded in that sense. But there was some, LitRPG is a little bit like fantasy. It wants it has a tendency to want larger books. So I kind of broke a genre convention there, and I got kind of hammered on that a little bit. And so, but that's okay. I mean, we're going to have an omnibus out, hopefully in spring. For people who like audiobooks, I'm hoping I think it's going to be about 18 hours of pure listening joy. And for people who passed it up because the ebooks were a little too small, then they'll have, I think, close to 180,000 words. So that should make everybody very happy, I'm hoping. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did the switch come about in terms of moving over? Because I think in our last conversation, we spoke a little bit about sort of moving over from genres, and obviously you'd had the Jenkins Cycle and then had gone into Hell's Children, and we're hopping over to LitRPG. How did that sort of transition come about for you?
Well, yeah. Well, I do like writing post-apocalyptic, but there was this pressure to write a book 3 for like Hell's Children. Like, I wouldn't want to go and write some other post-apocalyptic novel without having created a 3rd book in the Hell's Children, This Dark Age series. So I sort of said, okay, well, then I just won't write a post-apocalyptic, because I don't want to write about children dying and killing each other so soon after having just done that. It's a bit of a chore. It's a bit of, it's just a bit too much. I mean, I'm probably going to go back to it and finish it, but I got to recharge my batteries. I got to get some goodness and light in me before I sit down and do that again. So I said to myself, what is it that I kind of want to do? And I thought about it, and I said, well, I do like fantasy writing, but I don't necessarily want to do the world building that's required in fantasy. There's a tremendous amount. Now, there's world building, and there's a lot of world building in any book that you write, including, LitRPG. But you can kind of take it easy on like the histories of all the 5 lands and the histories of all the races and the magics, and you don't have to, you don't have to do all that with LitRPG. We all kind of know what it's like to play a video game. We know the tropes there. We've played World of Warcraft, EverQuest, all the things. So I said, and the other thing is it's sort of, I said, why don't I just write the book that I started writing in the late 90s. In the late 90s, I started writing a book about a guy who kind of goes into a virtual world. He goes into a virtual world where, all your magical powers and stuff are sort of simulated by a computer for you. You go pachoo, and light and magic shoots out and hits the monsters. And the only thing I was missing was the health points and the spell points and the mana and all that kind of stuff. But everything else was exactly kind of like my vision of a LitRPG novel. So I said, and I had stopped, here's the funny thing. I stopped writing that book back then because The Matrix came out. When The Matrix came out, I mean, nobody was writing stories like this that I remember, or doing movies like The Matrix. So I thought I had this kind of awesome thing. And then The Matrix comes out, and I'm like, No one's going to want this. They're going to say you're just copying the Matrix. Little did I know, publishers probably would have died to have a story that copied the Matrix because the Matrix was so popular. I didn't realize that. I was so naive. I didn't realize that that's exactly what publishing and Hollywood loves to do, is just sort of do what sold last time, But that's all right, So I took time off, 15 years off, I guess, to learn how to write, and then I wrote my first LitRPG. I played video games my whole life. I understand those tropes. I'm not a huge LitRPG reader. I did my research just to make sure that I wasn't doing something that was too far off the mark. Nonetheless, I didn't hit that nail too squarely either. There's still a lot of John L. Monk in the story, or he sort of wants to be almost a literary writer, but also a video game style story writer and stuff. The people who love my books, I absolutely love them. And the people that don't like them, I guess they want a little bit more, action, maybe a main character that isn't quite so, what do you call it? Maybe introspective, old. The story is about a future where old people retire to sort of a virtual world of their choice. There's a medical procedure that happens where you kind of, transfer your consciousness from a body to a computer. We've read those types of things before, and I wrote my own, where basically you have the computer brain and the flesh and blood brain, and you take layers of consciousness. Now they're both exactly equal, but you take layers of consciousness and you shut them off in the human brain and turn them on in the computer brain, and you just kind of do this step by step thing, turning off one layer and turning it on there, while the main character, feels as if it's entirely seamless. So there's not that whole shoot this person in the head, he's dead, and then turn that computer on and now he's alive, No, and so I thought that was kind of cool. That was hated by a big fan in LitRPG. They didn't want that. They thought it was, and I say that, I mean, it's the guy who does the LitRPG podcast. He didn't like that too much, but other people seem to have liked it. So there's definitely a lot of mixed reactions to the stories. I encourage anybody out there to pick them up, obviously, because then I get paid. But and I really hope you like them. So.
Yeah, because I've spoken to quite a few people that do the LitRPG thing, and I was in a conference last year and hung out with a lot of sort of the LitRPG guys, including it's Dakota Kraut from Mountaindale Press that you're signed with for that book, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was a previous guest on the podcast, and I think the general view that I've heard from LitRPG readers is they're very, I guess, so there are a lot of parallels between how they review and how they comment on forums, in terms of like the people that love it absolutely love it, and the people that hate it absolutely hate it. And it's really difficult to try and get a full consensus of people that absolutely love what's going on in the LitRPG genre. Because I don't know too much about it, so you might be able to sort of say a bit more, but I think there's still, because it's quite a new genre still in terms of everything else out there, it's still really trying to find its feet as to what its subgenres are and what its main tropes are within that category.
Yeah, it seems like there's almost like a religious war out there for the soul of LitRPG, for the people who are going to say what it absolutely is and what it absolutely isn't. And you'll see that in the reviews from me and any successful or unsuccessful LitRPG writer. The reviews are either really, really harsh or really, really friendly. And when they're harsh, it's always like, this is not LitRPG. This is barely game fiction. This is those are 19-sided dice. Those aren't 20-sided dice. I mean, you get a lot of that, and that's fine. It sort of caught me by surprise, because mostly in the past, my books, like the most awful reviews I suppose I got was, this is not realistic. I'm like, oh, you got me. It's not realistic. And now it's like, this person should just burn their computer.
Yeah, no, it seems to be an interesting model of transferring people over into the digital world. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about how you got involved with Mountaindale Press and how that all came to be as well. So I think that could be quite an interesting story.
Let me see. I don't know if it's an interesting. I was talking to a buddy of mine who is friends with the folks over at Mountaindale, and I didn't know that he was a big LitRPG fan, and I was just sort of saying, "Hey, I'm doing this whole LitRPG thing." It's like, "Oh my god, really? Let me read it." So he read it, and he loved it. This is nice, and he hooked me up with them. He just said, "Hey, you got to read this guy's stuff." He was raving about it. So Dakota, I think Dakota was about to catch a flight. And I guess I'd given the Moby to somebody. I think I gave it to my friend. I gave it to him. Dakota read it on the flight, read it straight through, absolutely loved it, which is great. I always encourage that kind of thing. And then we got on the phone and we started talking. And he's like, this is kind of who we are. And if that's something you'd be interested in doing, then let's move forward. I don't think I can get into it too much more because of non-disclosure stuff. There was this secret blood ritual rite that we had to do, and there was summoning of beasts.
Because I think it's interesting that so you started the LitRPG ahead of obviously this interaction with the guys at Mountaindale Press.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, how is it working with an independent publisher? Because I'm finding that we're in a bit of a spin in the independent community, in which obviously you've got a lot of people trying to do it for themselves. You've got a lot of solo authors. You've got obviously the traditional way, which obviously were the two routes before. But there now seems to be this sort of influx of people who are creating these story studios, who are becoming independent publishers and taking on those other authors. Have you found that experience quite smooth? Have you found it? How have you found sort of being taken into that route? Because all of your books before were self-published, weren't they?
Yeah, they were, and I will be self-publishing in the future because I'm not always going to write LitRPG. I'm not sure if I will necessarily go with another publishing group. I can't imagine anybody being better than Dakota and Mountaindale Press. They are great quality people. I mean, I just can't say enough. I can't say too much because I would be talking about how they do their business, I suppose. But they're always available for questions. They pay promptly. They release lots of documents to you showing how they do breakdowns of everything. They go over all the steps in the process with you as far as cover design and audiobook narration and editing and all the things that you'd want from, like, I call them a small press. That's kind of how I think about them. And so they're just absolutely quality people. And I can imagine, just because of the nature of people and the success rate of businesses, that there are small presses out there that, cater to indie authors kind of pulling together and stuff. I'm not saying Michael Anderle's group is like that. I'm just using him as an example. He's sort of one of those. He's like Mountaindale. So imagine there are groups out there. He's apparently a really good one. But I can imagine there's some really bad ones out there, and I would just hate to get hooked up with a group like that. So I think I got lucky. It was a real trust fall, with these folks, and they caught me before I hit the ground. How about that?
And what was it that actually brought you over into saying yes to that agreement? I mean, obviously we don't have to go into specific contract and stuff, but sort of, was there any points in when that offer was put forward to you where you were thinking, I might take this myself, I don't know whether or not to do this? What was the sort of the clincher that got you over?
Well, really, I was looking for reasons to say no. Okay, because everything they said was the type of thing that you want said. You have all this power, you can leave at any time. The money was really, good. I can't really talk about the specifics on that. There was nothing that he said was bad. And I was just sitting here because I'm a suspicious guy, and I just met these folks looking for a reason to say no. But I think what it came down to for me was that I'd spent I actually started writing this series of very short books in 2017, way too slow. I wrote them way too slow. I wasn't writing every day, so let's just be honest about it. But that was a large chunk of time. I mean, we only have so many heartbeats in it, and I wanted to make sure that I put my best foot forward with these books. And I couldn't think of a better group of people to go with. They have the marketing. Their books are great. Everything about them is really popular right now. And I thought the worst thing that happens is, I do better than I would have had I released kind of on my own. So it was sort of a no-brainer at some point, and I couldn't think of a reason to say no. And I jumped on board, full throttle. I was probably way too helpful. Like, hey, here's this, and hey, here's that, and can I do this for you? I'm like, would you just shut up and let us do our thing? Yeah. So I was probably a little bit too much of an indie-minded person, and I did a lot of apologizing and over helping, and I'm learning to cool my jets, all right, and chill out and let them be the pros that they are. And they were really patient with me,
Yeah, because I think that's the thing that I find really interesting is I know a lot of people who have had experiences with small presses where it's gone completely the other way and there's not really been what they expected. Rights have been sort of caught up in the tangle and everything else. But like you say, there is this wave of people who seem to care, seem to have their shit together. I think we're in a point, like I say, within the indie timeline now where it is getting to that point where people are so on it and they understand so much what the bigger publishing houses know, but they can also work better with some of the smaller places as well.
Yeah, it's all about trust. You got to be. I mean, imagine one of the things is survivability. I hate to get gruesome, but heaven forbid something happens to Dakota and Danielle. I have to wonder what happens to me. Who this is terrible, right? But who sends out the checks? How do I get it off of Amazon if they're not going to do that anymore? There's all these types of things. And, so when you go with a company, when you find a group that is going to publish for you, you want to make sure that they have all the infrastructure in place to take care of that. And Mountaindale does. So,
yeah, I am. The reason I'm sort of poking this point quite a lot is I'm selfishly in my head looking at ways in which I will in the future be starting a small press. So I'm quite excited about that. But moving on, one thing that I'm sure that people are quite hungry to know is how did the 3 quick releases compare to sort of the previous launches?
Well, that's the thing. So I think I might have had lightning in a bottle with Hell's Children. It exploded. I did very, very well. I did better with Hell's Children than I did with the first book, Mythian, which came in at 55,000 words. Mythian launched day one with a really negative video review from the guy from the LitRPG podcast. So he didn't really like it. He thought it was, I guess, okay. Probably was the best thing he could do. So it didn't launch with its best foot forward. It was sort of a rough launch. But, it got up into the top 1,000 and it stayed there for, I'd say about a week. And then, kind of went down. So for maybe the first 3 months, it was sort of, I think, in the top 2 to 4,000, jumping around. Then the book 2 came out, and it had a similar sort of sales rank history. And then book 3, with some drop off along the way. Whereas Hell's Children, it was it just exploded, but there was no book 2 to kind of compare to my Mythian adventures. So. I don't know. I mean, I think overall it was, I would say I'd give myself maybe like a B- as far as my launch. And it was all me. I mean, it was really, there's probably, I probably did a little too much. Ethan was sort of a depressing character. He's a grouchy guy. He didn't like games. I mean, you're writing a book for people who like video games, and the main character hates video games. You're writing a book for mostly younger people, and the main character is a 70-year-old retiree who's going into the video game world to find his wife who died in the last 5 years. One reader told me, it's really good and everything, but it is the most depressing thing in the world to get into. I'm like, what are you kidding me? There's jokes and stuff. Gotta hang in there,
That's one thing I quite like about the stuff that you're sort of putting into the books is that there is that element of you have to have what is John L. Monk in there, and there seems to be this sort of like not depressing, but this sort of this like grittier element of reality within the books. And I think finding an angle like that that's different to that genre Obviously could be a risk, but at the same time could sort of pay off really, really well for people that might want something a bit different within that genre.
I'm gonna put you on the spot here just because I'm curious. The last time we talked, you said that you read Hell's Children, and I was actually really shocked and amazed and flattered. Did you read Mythian? It's totally cool if you didn't.
I haven't, no.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I did think that would come up to me. I was like, probably should have read that one ahead. But
oh no, you shouldn't have. You shouldn't necessarily. You do, because you have to write, and you have these businesses, and you have to deal with Brexit and everything. You're a busy guy.
Yeah, I've got a different. I was speaking to a different author each week, so there'll be a lot of different types of books. Which I'm a fast reader, but it's also half term this week for my son, so I've been spending a lot of time with him.
You couldn't possibly do it, but I guess I just asked you because then I could say, "Hey, remember that part where kind of like that was going on?" Can't really do that.
Yeah, no, it was Hell's Children was definitely. I honestly mean it. I'm not just saying that because obviously you're on the show, but it's one of my favorite post-apocalyptic books.
Wow,
I really enjoy it.
Thank you. Yeah. Tell me more about my eyes.
But enough gushing. So obviously 3 books come out within 3 months. How long did that look in terms of the timeline of writing those 3 books? Because obviously people listening might think, oh yeah, 3 books is very, very, it's quick to sort of rapid release them. But what was the sort of reality of how long it took to write 1, 2, and 3 for you? I know you said they were slightly shorter books.
Yeah, the shorter. Well, like I said, I started writing in around, I think, September of 2017, and I released them in October of 2019. So, that's 2 years to write 180,000 words and get them all edited and everything else. But, it was sort of, there were these moments of really, really good word counts, I guess you would say, interspersed with periods where I didn't touch the book. So I could have written a lot faster, but it's a slog. I told myself I wanted to write 3 books in a row. You know how hard it is? It's like you just finished book 1 and then you can't release it. You want that immediate gratification. You're like, I've got another mountain to climb. I have to climb this other mountain. I've got to write a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the end had better be satisfying. The story had better matter. It's going to have highs and lows and depth and it's got to make people's heart race, and it's got to be funny and interesting, and I've got to do it 2 more times.
Mm-hmm.
It is just that's kind of a slog. I really hated the process of writing 3 in a row. So unless you folks out there like slugs, don't do it. Just can I also just say about Hell's Children? We're going to keep going back to my better days, I guess. No, this is a very good day. I'm just joking around. But in Hell's Children, I did not release it as a series. It did extremely well. I think for me, this is well. Okay. I think Lindsay Broker just would laugh at the numbers I made, but maybe in the first couple of months I made about $25,000. Right. For me, that was huge. And it also very personal because I had to use that money to help pay for my wife's cancer treatment, and she's doing great now. So it came just when I needed it. The point is, you can write standalones and make a ton of money, okay? You can make good money. If I wrote a standalone called Hell's Children and followed it with a standalone called, like The Guy at the End of the World, and it also made $25,000 in 2 months, and I followed that up with, The Day Everything Went Dark, and that made $25,000 or something, I could probably make a career out of this with just standalones. There you go. So you don't have to necessarily write a series all the time.
Yeah, it's definitely contrary to what you hear a lot, and I think it's good to hear that the standalone still does have some kind of merit. And I know there are people out there doing that, but I think the people at the minute that get a lot of the circuit time, a lot of the voice time on podcasts, on sort of shows and like online forums and things, it does seem to be the serials that seem to be the loudest voices among people.
Yeah. Well, that's what it is. The algorithm. The cool thing about writing a series is that, especially if you write them every 90 days, is you always have a book that is either in the hot new releases, which is a 30-day process, or that sort of 90-day cliff where you're still hot. You're a warm new release for 90 days, after between 30 and 90 days, and then you drop off the cliff. Okay. So if you're writing a series, you'll always have a book in the series that is always highly visible on Amazon. But the same can be done with standalones. I have not written 3 standalones in a row to prove it out. But Hell's Children was a standalone until it became a series. And book 2 did not do that well. I mean, it actually got way better reviews, but people forgot all about it, and that's not a good thing.
So how has your writing process changed over the last couple of years? Because I know you said obviously there are periods where days where you don't write, some days where you do write. How does it look for you on sort of a typical day of a week?
So what I do is I wake up super early in the morning, between 5 and 6. That's super early for me, and I pack everything up. I probably set the coffee up for my wife to kind of go off because I never do it the night before. And I pack everything up and I go over to like Pete's Coffee or Starbucks, right? And I order my stuff. I sit down. I do my very best not to go and open up any social media. I'm going so far as to shut off the Wi-Fi. And that's where I write. That's where I do my best writing. If I write at home, I'm way too likely to sit there and look at the news or check Facebook or anything. I usually, at the start of every chapter, I put up in brackets at the top what I want that chapter to do. And then I write towards that kind of goal. And I always consider it really successful if I put 3 things at the top and I only get one of them done, because that means I get to write 2 more chapters. And so it's like, making small things big is kind of like how I look at it. The one sentence might be, have the main character get on the boat and find the clue. Okay. So that's a small thing, right? That's a sentence. It's one. I couldn't just write that as a chapter. So I start writing the chapter about, getting onto the boat. And then I get to the end of the chapter and I go, but he didn't find the clue. All right, cool. That's the next chapter. Okay. So it is, it's making small things big. That's kind of how I think of it. Other people say, yeah, it's going by an outline. Well, I outline as I go. There is a sort of overarching outline, I guess, as I sit down. I want to know where the story is going to eventually be. I don't want to write myself into a corner, but I do not do a detailed outline. It's literally half a page of beginning. Man follows his wife into a video game like reality. 2, man levels up, acquires power, meets friends, has second thoughts, sticks to the plan. 3, man overcomes obstacles, finds wife, that kind of thing.
So pretty bare bones in terms of like not even giving the character a name at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. The names come later. For except for the main character, all my names are whatever I think of like really quickly. Like Brian, his name's Brian. Yeah. I don't go, oh my God, I need it to be this or that. Sometimes I do. My villain name I had a real hell of a time with. The villain's name in Mythian is Cypher, right?
Nice.
Which I thought was a pretty cool name. And I actually got that name from a friend of mine who was writing in horror. And I'm like, dude, I found out that the main character name I had, Glitch, is a major title name for a bunch of LitRPG books. Glitch is on glitch this and glitch that. It's I couldn't use that without people going, you're ripping off another LitRPG book. But that was the main character, the bad guy in the story. And I was at a loss and I was struggling for weeks trying to come up with a better name for it. And then I just said, hey, dude, I want to name him Cypher, but you named the guy in your story Cypher. Are you going to get mad at me? And he's like, no, dude, take it. It's totally different genres. Go for it.
Yeah. No, I think villains are always, like you say, names for general people. I'm very much the same as you. I'll just, whatever comes at the time, that'll be what I call the person. But there seems to be, with villains, it needs to have some kind of injection of notoriety, or there needs to be like an edge to the name just to give it that little bit of extra villainy, I guess.
Yeah, like Dr. Evil. It's not Brad.
It's not Hugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And has that process changed much for you in the last couple of years, or has that always just been sort of the way that you've worked and that's kind of what works for you?
Yeah, it kind of is the way. I mean, I've tried to do the heavy outlining stuff. I recently read a great book by Terry Brooks called it's like sometimes the magic, uh, I don't know, something about the magic. So I read his book and he got me onto outlining. He said, "Yo, yeah, this is the greatest thing in the world." He really, really sold me on outlining. And I was going to sit down and outline. And I was just like, this sucks. I'm not outlining. This is crazy. I'll do a very spare outlining. At the beginning of every chapter, I say what I want that chapter to do. I've done that since Kick. Kick was my very first book, worked for Kick. And so I guess you could say I'm a pantser or discovery writer, as I think other people call it. Brandon Sanderson likes to call it that. So if he's calling it that, it's got to be a good thing. Yeah.
See, it's definitely a good point, because I started writing 2015, and I was very much similar to how you are now, sort of discovery writing. I'd put like a couple of things, maybe a bit of an exoskeleton as to where I want the story to head, but nothing ever that detailed. And then I think I got caught in the trap of, over time, just read this book, need this outline, read this book. You've got these 5 main points. You've got to read this book. You've got 7 more points of different things that you want to do. And I'm now at the point where I'm finding that I'm almost rediscovering my original writing process, because there are elements of writing that I'm not enjoying so much anymore, because I've gone very, very far away from what I was originally writing and why I started, sort of, on how I was working in the beginning. So I think you can easily get bogged down by all these different ways of how you should be writing. And particularly, I know people that write pages and pages of outlines. I think, I hear something the other day about James Patterson's outlines are like 15,000 words.
Oh my God.
I'm like,
yeah,
that's most of the book.
yeah, it is. I kind of look at outlining as like outlining is sort of like writing to an outline is sort of like coloring, like a coloring book. You're filling in the coloring, and discovery writing is sort of like drawing. You're just sort of doodling, and you're making eyes and cool nose and a mouth. And I've always found drawing, I guess, more fun than coloring. But Brandon Sanderson has an interesting way of looking at it too, and it's a little bit discouraging. He said discovery writers have the tendency to have really, really great characters and fun stories and terrible endings. Okay.
Yeah.
And outliners have really good endings that just everything is just tied up, and the characters and stuff have the tendency to be more wooden. And of course, he's doing his very best to make sure that that doesn't happen to him. He's an outliner, so, and you can tell because his books are just tight. They really are. Mythian, let's talk about me. No, Mythian.
I mean, you're here.
Yeah, that's right. Now, a lot of people didn't like the ending to book 1. I loved it. So those people are wrong. 2 had a great ending. But I will say one thing. I was extremely 100% ultra pleased with the ending of the series. I was just very, when you've just wrapped it up so beautifully, and coming at this as a discovery writer and finding out that my endings are supposed to suck, I feel almost like, yeah, all right. So I am the exception to the rule. And, I'm sitting here obviously bragging about my own books and stuff, but I think you've heard me before. I already said it wasn't like, I didn't hit the genre squarely on the head, but I think that anybody who goes into it, I think they're going to like the ending.
Yeah. You heard it here. Check out his books. Are there more to come within that series itself, or is that it for Mythian?
As a matter of fact, there is. I'm actually writing a follow-up story. The first 3 books, it's done. That series is done. I'm never going to write a 4th book of that series, but I'm writing a book about a necromancer that was hinted at on the very last page of the 3rd book. It's a story about a necromancer named Howard. So, and I'm at about 54,000 words. I want this story to be a bit bigger than the 3 books. I want to hit those genre conventions a little bit more squarely. A little bit lighter. Nobody's dogs get killed. Nobody's wife die. He's not a grumpy old man. Yes, he's a 70-year-old guy, but he's young at heart. And we don't ever hear about how physically old he is. It's not like a big deal. Unlike in Mythian, it was a big deal because you're introducing to the world. So, yeah.
So building upon that series.
Yeah, it's
Like,
a
you
lot
know,
of
it's
action, a lot of action, a lot of fun moments, and longer. I'm thinking 80 to 90K. If it goes longer, yay, that'd be cool. Because people want to keep reading. They don't want to leave the world. They think our world sucks. They want to be in the book,
yeah.
and I can't blame them sometimes.
Nice. My one more main question from myself before we jump into one of our Patreon questions. Why do you write, John Monk?
For like the Lamborghinis and the ladies, I guess. Because I hear you get those. I'm only kidding. I'm married. I would get yelled at for that. How do I write? I've always wanted to write ever since I was a kid. So, and I was writing stories when I was a kid. So it was never a money thing until I got into IT. And then I'm like, I'd love to be able to write and make enough money not to have to work in IT or for anybody. I think every author out there listening, well, you can't say absolutes, but darn near every author out there listening, they want to quit their jobs. So, that's kind of what keeps me going. This idea that I could go full time writing, doing the thing I love to do, which is creating something, and the idea that there would be something left behind after I'm gone. Whether there's an afterlife, I don't know, but there's going to be some books left behind. Yeah,
Exactly why I do it. Okay, over into our Patreon questions now. So these questions have been provided by the patrons over at www.patreon.com/greatwritershare. And the first one is from someone who you may be familiar with, which is P.T. Hilton, who says, would you rather fight Bruce Lee in his prime or an elderly grizzly bear?
PT is an incredible writer, by the way. If you haven't read his books, you're missing out. Start with Regulation 19, in my opinion, and read it. That's a guy who can finish the series, by the way. His 3-book Deadlock trilogy is amazing. All right, so enough kissing PT's ass. Bruce Lee in
prime or an elderly grizzly bear?
Well, I could probably kick Bruce Lee's ass. I'm a lot bigger than he is, and I just saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I saw how easy he is to beat up. If you haven't seen it yet, Brad Pitt throws him across a kind of a courtyard into a car and leaves a great big dent.
Incredible.
Right. So a grizzly bear of any age is going to kill me. So I'll fight Bruce Lee. He just bloodied me up probably. If he won, he probably would win. I'm kidding around here. I'm out of shape. So there you go.
Nice. What is your top productivity tip or the go-to habit that keeps you on track?
A top productivity tip is just to make sure the first thing I do every day is writing, because everything else will push it away if I do that first. I'll give you a second tip is a tip that I got from Terry Brooks in that book is fantasize about your stories. Don't just think about them with the intent to like write the next page. Sit there wondering about them, wonder about the people and what their hair color is and what jokes they would laugh at and what the things they like to eat. And think about it just for the joy of thinking about it. And if you do that, you'll find that you can't shut up. The words will just start flowing. And if you forget to do that and you forget that that's what you got to do, you'll find yourself in periods, or at least I will, of writer's block, which is kind of a terrible place to be. And we all hear the thing, oh, writer's block doesn't exist. I used to think that, but I don't know what else you call it when you're not writing and you want to.
Mm. Yeah. One additional question for me, just because it's something that's popped up a couple of times in the interview I had with you before and during this one. You seem to have a very, very good memory for remembering people's books and remembering specifically titles of books and author names as well. Is that something that you've just always been quite good at? Because I am terrible for remembering. The minute I want to recommend something, I just cannot remember the name of it. It's
so weird that you say that. I've felt that my memory has been dying with every year that goes by. And it's a bit of a worry to me. I try my very best to remember the names of books and the people who write them, especially if I know who they are. And I feel just mortified when I can't. I am the guy who meets you. You tell me your name. I immediately forget the name. I didn't even listen. I was looking at you mouth the words and I'm going, whatever. I don't know what I'm thinking of.
This is me too. I'm the same.
It's a terrible thing. I'm surprised that you're complimenting my memory. Let's put it that way. So.
Okay, right. So that is all the questions from the patrons. We're now going to go into our quickfire round, which is 10 questions. I'll throw at you as quickly as possible. Feel free to skip if you need to. It's all in fun. It doesn't mean anything because we're all going to die at the end of it. Not the end of these questions, but
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I think so. I don't want to die though.
Okay, Westworld or Witcher?
Westworld, because I've seen it.
Okay. Favorite TV show of all time?
Breaking Bad. Yeah, Breaking
Good
Bad.
choice. Out of all of your own books, which is your favorite?
I'd say Kick.
Chinese or Indian?
Crap. Indian.
Who was the last writer to make you laugh?
Jim
Memory of things going to come back to Kick.
No, there's so many people. Jim Butcher. He always makes me laugh.
Worst film of all time?
Worst film of all time?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Lord. It's Torgo, Hand of Fate.
Nice. What's your preferred drink of choice?
Bourbon, preferably Gentleman Jack.
Oh, good choice. What's your dream holiday destination?
I think Australia. I'd love to go to Australia.
Is there a Christmas present you wished you got but never received?
A pony.
Who's your favorite person in the whole wide world?
My wife.
Nice. And one bonus question: where can our listeners find out everything about you and all that you're working on?
John-L-Monk.com is my website. I don't keep it up to date very often, but if I have a new release, I'll put it there, and there's a link there for my newsletter.
Perfect. And for those of you who haven't checked out the Chronicles of Ethan and all of John's other works, be sure to check those out. I'll put all the links in the show notes. John, thank you very much for joining me on the show. It's been a blast to catch up.
Thank you, and I'm glad I lived.
That's right. We'll survive for a little while anyway. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I will see you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Great Writers Share podcast. This week, I'd like to know from you what your optimum release schedule looks like. Is it 1 book a year? Is it 12 books a day? Let me know by tagging hashtag Great Writers Share on social media or popping a comment on the Facebook group. Don't forget you can get early access to every episode of the Great Writers Share podcast and the chance to ask upcoming guests any of your questions just by becoming a patron of the show. All you need to do is visit www.patreon.com/Great Writers Share and support the show for as little as $1 a month. One more time, that's www.patreon.com/Great Writers Share. Until next time.